Today I wanted to talk about casting on stitches. Now it can be something that might be a little bit daunting when you're starting your first knitting project, but I'm going to show you 3 different techniques, and there are so many different techniques to be able to cast on, but I'm going to show you what I first learned and then 2 that I progressed to after that. In these tutorials, I'm going to show you the way that I knit. Now, everybody knits in a very different way, whether it's the needles they prefer to use, the yarn they prefer to use, how they hold the needles, how they hold the yarn, but I'm going to show you my way. So to cast on, you're going to need some yarn and some needles. The first thing we're going to do is a slip knot. Again, there's lots of different ways people do it, and you'll find your way, but the way I like to think about it is it's like tying a knot but not pulling it all the way through. So as if you're going to tie a knot and pull it all the way through, but you just grab the strand there and then you pull it up, and that is your slip knot. I like to think about it as making a knot but not pulling it all the way through. So go as if you're going to tie a regular knot, but then grab the yarn and hold the tail and then pull to create the slip knot. And there you have your first stitch that you'll put onto your needle, pull tight like so, and you have your first stitch. I'm going to show you once more because it is important to learn a slip knot. So you go to make a knot, but instead of pulling it all the way through, you just grab the yarn and then hold the end of it and pull it up like so, and that is your slip knot. The first way I would teach people to cast on is the thumb method. It's pretty easy to get the hang of, and you'll have stitches cast on in no time. One of the first things that you need to learn is the fact that this is going to be referred to as the tail, which is not attached to the ball of yarn, and this is going to be your working yarn, which is attached to the ball of yarn. So what you're going to do is you're going to take your yarn, like so, and you're going to use your thumb to create a loop. So you're going to fold it onto itself, and then you're going to put it onto the needle, and then that is your second stitch. I'm going to show you so many times that you're going to not even know what to do with yourself. So you're going to get your yarn, you're going to fold it like so, so it's a loop. And then you're going to put that loop onto your needle and then pull the working yarn so it pulls tight. I'll show you again. So you take the yarn, you're going to fold it onto itself so it creates a loop, and then you put it on like so. The most important thing when you're doing this method is to make sure that when you take the yarn, you fold it onto itself like so, so that the working yarn is on top of the yarn that's attached to the needle, and then you put it onto needle, and then you're just adding stitches. So you take it, fold it onto itself, and then onto the needle. One of the common mistakes that people make is they fold it back on itself, and if you're folding it on its back, when you put it on, it doesn't create a loop. Whereas if you fold it onto itself and the yarn that's attached to the ball is in front, then you can put it on and it will stay on your needle. Any knitting project is transferring stitches from one needle to the other, then back again, and then back again, and then back again. And then by the end of it, you're going to have this lovely piece of knitwork that you've made. So casting on the stitches is the first and probably one of the more important things. The next method I'm going to show you is the knit cast on. So you're going to start the same way that you did with the other method. So you're going to make your slip knot, which again is like tying a knot but not pulling it all the way through, like so. Then you're going to put it onto your needle, and then instead of using the thumb to cast on stitches like before, what we're going to do is we're going to transfer this needle into your left hand, and you're going to learn actually how to knit. For this cast on, I've got my tail on this side and I've got my working yarn trailing over here, because we're going to knit stitches, and instead of transferring onto a different needle, what we're going to do is keep them onto the left needle to cast on the stitches. So what we're going to do is we're going to take our right needle in our right hand and then move it to the left side of that first stitch. Then we're going to go through it front to back, keeping this needle at the back like so, creating a little cross. Then we're going to take our working yarn, wrap it round the back like that. Then, keeping this yarn tight and having a little bit of tension on it, we're going to bring the needle that we just put through back through to the front, like so. And then instead of dropping it off like we would to knit, we're going to then put that stitch onto that left needle, like so. And that has created your second stitch. So I'm going to show you again. So you're going to take your right needle, put it to the left side of that stitch, then you're going to go through the stitch, you're going to go around the back, keeping tension on the yarn. You're going to then pull the needle back through where it came and to the front, and then you're going to create a little bit of space in the stitch and drop it onto the left needle like so. And now we have 3 stitches. I'm going to show you again. So you're going to have your right needle, put it to the left side of that first stitch, then you're going to push it through the stitch, you're going to wrap the yarn around the back, then keeping tension again, you're going to pull the yarn back through where it came, like so, and then pull up to create a little bit of a loop, and then drop it onto that left needle. I'll show you again. Right needle to the left side of that stitch. You're going to go through the stitch. Then you're going to wrap the yarn around the back, keep the tension on the yarn, then you're going to pull that needle back through where it came to the front, like so. Pull up a little bit to create some space, and then drop it onto that left needle. Then we'll do the same again. Right needle to the left side, through the stitch, wrap it round the back, keep tension on this yarn, on the working yarn, then you're going to pull the needle back through where it came to the front, pull a little bit of yarn up, and then drop it onto the left needle and pull to create a nice tight cast on. Right needle is to the left of that first stitch, then it's going to go through that stitch like so. Then you're going to use the working yarn to wrap around that back needle. Then you're going to pull the needle back through where it came to the front, pull up to create a little bit more looseness on that stitch. Then you're going to drop it onto that left needle, and that is another stitch cast on. So this is the fundamental part of knitting. Like, this is one of the cast-ons that you're learning to knit at the same time as casting on. So if you can handle this, knitting's going to be a breeze. So again, you bring your right needle to the left side of that first stitch, you push it all the way through the stitch, then you have your working yarn, you wrap it around the back, and then you bring this knitting needle back through where it came to the front, then you pull up and you drop that loop onto the left needle. Right needle to the left side of that first stitch, you're going to go all the way through it, wrap the yarn around the back, and then pull the yarn through to the front, pull up a loop, and drop it onto that left needle. I remember when I first learned how to cast on, it was one of the more frustrating parts of knitting because it is something that felt quite unnatural. The thumb method felt very easy to me. I picked that up quite quickly, but this method is learning to knit and cast on all at the same time. So it is one of the ones that is a slightly tighter cast on as well. So it's really good for something if you want a rigid edge. If you're a beginner, I would start with the thumb method, but this method is, once you know how to knit, you're going to be able to do this method in your sleep. But if you don't know how to knit yet, the thumb method is a great way to cast on stitches initially. First time I tried to cast on, it was a nightmare. I found it incredibly fiddly. I didn't know where to hold the needles, where to hold the yarn, where to hold the project, how to keep the needles from falling off of how to keep the yarn from falling off the needles. So as you go, you'll learn where to keep your fingers to hold the project onto the needles, how to hold the yarn, whether it's between your fingers, around your fingers. You'll figure out your own way how to hold it so it's comfortable. But for me, I kind of just learned how to use my fingers in a way to hold stitches in place so that they didn't move when I didn't need them to. So I like to hold that edge stitch while I'm doing this so I know that it's not going to go anywhere when I'm doing all of the fiddly bits with casting on the stitches. With these tutorials, I'm not just going to show you one time and then you have to keep rewinding and going back to it. I want to try and teach you personally how to do it. So being able to show you and repeat it over and over until you feel like you might have the hang of it. Because it can be frustrating when you're looking at tutorials and they go so quick and you're like, wait, how did that happen? What's going on? But sometimes you just need to see it loads and loads of times and you'll slowly get the hang of it. Because for me, that was something that I really struggled with, is knowing how to cast on, how to knit, and everything moved so quickly. So I'm going to do a super slow one. So we're going to go, and I'm going to stop and pause after each instruction so it gives you a chance to look down and see what you're doing. So you've got your stitches that you want to cast on to your left needle, and you have your right needle with no stitches on them. So you're going to put your right needle at the end of your left needle. Got it? Okay. Now we're going to move this right needle to the left side of the stitch. Okay? Now we're going to put that needle through the stitch all the way like that, and it creates a little cross, right? Now we're going to take our working yarn and wrap it around that back needle, like so. Okay? Now you're going to hold this yarn with your needle to be able to create a little bit of tension on it. We got that? Now, bring that needle back down where it came, back through to the front, like so. So you go from the back to the front, keeping the yarn that you just wrapped around the needle on the needle. Now, you're going to pull up to create a little bit of space in that loop, and then drop that loop onto the left needle, like so. Show you again. Right needle to the left of that first stitch, through the stitch, like so. Then you're going to wrap the working yarn around the back. Then you're going to pull that needle back through where it came to the front, like so. Then you're going to pull the yarn up to create the loop that is going to then be dropped onto the left needle. And this is just going to take lots and lots of practice, but once you've got the hang of it, it's going to be a breeze. So I have some stitches cast on here now for my knit cast on, and there is one more way that I want to teach you, and that is my personal favorite and the one that I always use, and that is the long tail cast on. Now, part of its name actually gives you a clue about what we're going to have with this cast on, and that is a long tail. So whereas before we were making the slip knot at the end of the working yarn, now what we're going to do is create a little bit of a long tail, because we're going to use the tail and the working yarn when we're casting on. So for this one, just for example, I'm going to create a semi-long tail just because I'm going to show you, but when you're making a project, depending on how many stitches you're casting on, the tail will need to be longer for more stitches and it can be shorter for less stitches. But what we're going to do is we're going to make a slip knot in the same way that we have done previously. So as if we're going to tie a knot and pull it all the way through, but just grab the yarn like so, and you've got your slip knot. But for this slip knot, that's different to the others, is that it's got a really long tail before it gets to the end. And then we're going to have that tail out of the way for now. When you've got your stitch on your needle, what we're going to do is you're going to put your thumb under one side, and then you're going to put your index finger on the other, creating a triangle. Then once you've created that triangle, what you're going to do is you're going to create the loop like you would for the thumb method. You're going to go through it, and then the yarn that's on the index finger is what you're going to pull through with your needle, like so, and then just pull it. So then you have two on your needle. I'm going to show you again. So you've got your triangle, like so. You're going to take your knitting needle, and you're going to go through the loop that you've made with your thumb. Then you're going to pull the yarn through that's on your index finger, like so. When you're doing this cast on, it's not really going to matter which is the tail and which is the working yarn, because as long as you keep it consistent throughout the whole time that you're doing it, it's not going to matter. So with this, I'm going to create the triangle. So the triangle looks like this. The yarn is around my thumb and I'm using my index finger on the other side to stretch it out. So I'm kind of making a shape like this. So I'm going to put my finger, the yarn that's further away from your needle is you're going to put your index finger on, and then your thumb is going to go underneath, kind of spreading out the two yarns. And then you just use your other fingers to keep tension on it to make it easier to hold the yarn. So now you're going to take your needle and you're going to go in front of this yarn and through the loop that you've created. Then you're going to use the yarn that's attached to your index finger to pull through that loop, and that is a stitch that you just created. So I'm going to show you super slow again. You're going to take your needle, you're going to go through the loop that you make with your thumb, like we were doing with the thumb loop method. Then you're going to pull through the yarn that's right around your index finger with that needle. So you're going to take the needle, and you're going to go behind the yarn and pull it through that loop, like so. So you're going to take your needle, you're going to go through the loop that you've made with your thumb, then you're going to take the yarn that's by your index finger, go behind it to pull it through the loop you made with your thumb, and then you pull both strands, and then all of a sudden you've got another stitch on your needle. So again, needle through the loop you make with your thumb, then you're going to use the needle to pull the yarn that's wrapped around your index finger through that loop, and then pull the strands tight. Once you get the hang of this, you're going to be able to go woo, and it's going to go so quick, and it's going to feel like the easiest thing that you've ever done, I promise you. But until you get the hang of it, it looks fiddly, because it can be at the beginning. But I'm going to show you again. You've got the loop that you're making with your thumb, where you're folding the yarn onto itself. So you fold it onto itself, you put the needle through that loop. Then the yarn at the back, you're going to use your needle to go behind it and pull it through. And once you've pulled it through, pull it tight, and you created another stitch. It's about figuring out how to rotate your hand in order to make it easier. I like to think about it as like keeping the needle kind of where it is and then using your hands to rotate. So you rotate to create the first loop, and then you rotate your hand to bring the yarn through to the front and pull both strands. If you put your needles down and you pick them back up and you're confused about how you were doing it before, it already kind of sits where there's a yarn that is tailing towards this side of the needle and there's a yarn that's tailing towards you. So you can always still kind of see where that triangle is going to be split apart. You have the yarn that's on this side and the yarn that's on this side. So you again create that triangle and try and keep your needles kind of still. You do a little bit of wiggling, but you kind of keep it still and yet let your hands do the movement. So you create the loop, you put the loop onto the needle, then you're going to bring that yarn that's at the back through that loop, and then that is going to be the piece of yarn that stays on the needle. So again, you create that loop, your needle goes through the loop that it's made, then you bring the yarn that's on the index finger through that loop, and then you pull both strands and you've created another stitch. I'm going to keep talking while you just watch my hands slowly, and I'm going to cast on lots of long tail stitches. So once you get the hang of the movement of creating the loop, the needle goes through the loop, and then you use the needle to pull the yarn at the back through to the front. And it's just that repetitive motion of loop, needle through, back, strand of yarn comes through to the front and onto your needle. Again, you got your triangle. You create the loop with the strand closest to you, put it on. Then you get the yarn that's at the back and pull it through that loop, and it creates another stitch. I'm going to show you what it looks like if you were accidentally to switch the strands, like so, and you start doing it the other way with the different strands. You can barely notice a difference. It's really not going to make a huge difference, especially for your first projects. Once you get the hang of it, you won't need to worry about it, but I'll do a couple of extra stitches so you can see what it would look like if you start changing which way it was. So the change happened here. but you can't notice that. And it's the first row of stitches. And as you can see, you wouldn't know where you changed there. So I wouldn't worry about which one is the front, which one is the back, but just try to keep it consistent if you can. So again, now I have the yarn that's at the front, and then I have a yarn that's at the back that's just naturally falling that way. It's creating the triangle already. So once we've got that, we just emphasize that triangle with our thumb and our index finger. We create the loop, put your needle through the loop, and then use the needle to pull the back yarn through to the front. So you got your triangle, loop, pull through. Loop, through, strand of yarn through. Again, got your triangle, you put it through the loop that you make with your thumb, and then the yarn at the back, you pull through with your needle, and that's what stays on to your needle. When you're learning to cast on, don't be too hard on yourself. It is something that can be really a little bit tricky to learn from a YouTube tutorial. And yes, it is fiddly, and yes, you might have stitches that drop off, but just keep practicing. And that's the beauty of knitting, is if you find someone or you know someone that knits, they'll be able to show you in no time. And it creates community. And knitters, if you reach out to anyone will want to teach you how to knit, because if you're a knitter, it is your favorite thing to talk about. So having someone in your family, a friend, that will be able to show you how to cast on stitches, you'll really get the hang of it. But for me, it's about just practicing and understanding that the mechanics of knitting is loops with other loops. So you create a loop to pull a piece of yarn through that creates another loop. And then it's endless loops and loops and loops that end up with your knitted fabric. I'm going to carry on casting on stitches because I'm your knitting buddy. I'm here to learn with you and be here for you when you're learning. So being able to just be really patient with learning to put it through the loop and then pulling the yarn through. It's going to take a little bit of time, and it might feel really fiddly at the start, but once you get the hang of it and you understand how knitting works with the loops going through others, it just feels right. You'll know that you're doing it right because it will feel like, oh, this is making sense. This yarn goes through here and I'm able to put it onto the stitch, putting the stitch on the needle, and it's not falling off, it's not too tight, it's not too loose. You want to be able to keep it so that the stitches can move easily across your needle as well, so that it's easy to start knitting when you start your first row. So you're going to be just loop. Again, this is, if you accidentally, for example, do a loop that you don't pull the yarn through at the back, that's what the thumb loop method looks like. It's just not as secure as a long tail cast on. So you just constantly loop, pull the yarn through the loop and onto your needle. Triangle, through the loop, pull the back strand of yarn through that loop, and it's on your needle. A long tail cast on is one of the methods that when you figure out how to do it, for me, it's the most efficient way to cast on. It's my fastest way of casting on, and it also keeps it really secure. And I like the way that it creates this kind of like stitch at the bottom, and you can see this edge. I think it forms like a really pretty edge. There are so many different ways to cast on. These are just the beginning. Like there's cast-ons that create like a tubular edge to it. There's cast-ons where you can like twist it. So once you learn the basic mechanics of casting on, there are so many tutorials about how to cast on in so many other ways. But out of all of the 3 ways that we've cast on today, this is my preferred way to cast on, because there is something about it that just allows me to really repetitively just follow this little pattern that is triangle, loop, pull the yarn through, drop it down, loop, pull yarn through, drop it down. And you can go even slower, like so. Through, like that. You can also think about this as, you know, with the slip knot where you're making a knot but not pulling it all the way through. It's the same. You create the loop, and then as if you're going to pull that through to create another knot, but you just create another slip knot. So it's basically creating lots of slip knots, one after the other, to attach to your needle. So there we have it, 3 different ways to cast on, and casting on is one of the trickiest parts of learning to knit. Once you're knitting and you've got those stitches cast on and you do your first couple of rows, you're going to be away. But learning how to cast on is a really important thing because it has to start with a cast on stitch to be able to create any project. Thank you for watching this video. Now don't forget to subscribe to Let's Get Knitting for more tutorials of knit and crochet, and of course some extras from Game of War.